Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thanks for stopping by. It's Wednesday. It's once again time for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. So strap in for another scintillating safari into the subterranean subculture of geekdom. Before I start answering questions, I got a question for you. Have you ordered my new Conan novel, The Siege of the Black Citadel? It's a novel very much written, I hope, in the style of Robert E. Howard. And it's a, archetypical Conan story. It's got everything you want in a story about the Cimmerian. It's, sex, violence, creepy monsters, dark magic, and all the rest of it. So I'd appreciate it if you would at least check it out, because I had a lot of fun writing it. It's the first of a series of 3, and the second one is already written. So it's coming down the pike. Scott Steubing, as kind of a follow-up to my last question, do you think that DC's multiple reboots as opposed to retcons helped or hurt DC in the long run? I don't think they helped. They kept turning to this and other tired gimmicks as a way of increasing sales. I don't know why they couldn't just do, company-wide crossover events. They used to work in the past. Why they had to feel they had to keep restarting the engine. As anybody familiar with cars knows, constantly restarting your engine puts wear and tear on the engine. Over time, it's harmful. And I think that's what happened at DC, among many other things, many other mistakes they made. But largely, constantly changing the continuity, constantly restarting, constantly rebooting. Strictly as a comic book reader, you feel like the earth has shifted beneath your feet. The goalposts have moved. The rules have changed. Nobody looks familiar anymore. It's the same house with different people living in it. You know what I mean? So it's hard to gin up the enthusiasm to invest yourself in the umpty new version of, Aqualad, or Wonder Woman, or whoever the character is, because they've changed your understanding of who they are and their relationships with each other and thrown continuity out the window. So as you read the comics, you're no longer sure who knows who's friends, who's enemies. Is their origin the same? Are their powers the same? Do they have the same ancillary cast of supporting characters? You don't know. And whilst the occasional reboot can be fun, I just think the constant reboots, the constant stream of restarts was just an enormous error in judgment. But again, they seem to be creatively bankrupt, or at least the people at the top were. And so they just kept stabbing the same shiny red button over and over again, hoping for different results. And, we see how that worked out. Ramulanda, do you know the character called Mike Hammer, created by Mickey Spillane? He's a tough private detective, the kind that loves shooting bad guys and flirting with beautiful women. Exactly the kind that is getting constantly demonized and replaced by Mary Sue's nowadays. I wonder if you have ever thought about writing a graphic novel starring him as a protagonist, and who would you pick to be artist? I'm very familiar with Mickey Spillane. Growing up, my uncle read his books, and then eventually I started reading his books. And I think I've read every Mike Hammer novel that he wrote. They're kind of like salted peanuts. You start reading them and you want to read the next one. Spillane was a muscular writer, a pure pulp writer who apologized for nothing. These stories are generally brutal, sexist, sometimes misogynistic. He doesn't. Mike Hammer doesn't even seem to care for children. He's just a brute of a character, and a lot of fun to read. And oftentimes, the mysteries don't particularly make sense if you work them backwards. It's like, how did Hammer come to this conclusion? Just before he, filled this guy full of lead. He seemed awful sure of himself on very scant evidence. But anyway, they're fun to read. And Spillane he could keep you turning pages. And that is a talent all on its own. Of course, he was a character himself. Did a lot of TV appearances, famously appeared in beer ads. Even played Mike Hammer himself in a movie. Just a true character. And kind of growing up, my first glimpse of a writer, I mean, sure, Gore Vidal was on TV all the time, but, I'm a kid. Am I going to pay attention to what Gore Vidal says? Mickey Spillane, as a kid, like, he was funny and so sure of himself. And you often got the idea that he didn't realize how funny he was. But just, and apparently an awesome guy, a sweetheart of a guy. And very cool. Have I ever considered doing comics or a graphic novel? No, because Max Allan Collins wouldn't like that. Max Allan Collins had an actual personal relationship, creative relationship with Spillane, and is always associated with Spillane projects. So no, it's not turf I would want to tread on, as it's being capably handled by Mr. Collins. But yeah, it would be fun. I love the character. It would be fun. Okay. Ramulanda again. Sorry, I meant to do a twin spin for you and I forgot. Next time, I promise. After the news about the wokenizing of classic books, I got really scared. Do you think we should start accumulating books and movies before they get edited to fit the woke tyranny? Should we still hope that this censorship would stop or even be reversed at some point? If you've got a favorite book, movie, even song, I would get a physical copy of it and to have it, because we're seeing stuff getting altered all the time, and it's sad. My prime example of this is one of my favorite Disney cartoons, Pecos Bill. And Pecos Bill is it's like a 10-minute cartoon, and it's being whittled down over the years as they remove Native Americans from it. They remove Pecos Bill smoking from it. Eventually, they're going to carve this movie down to a minute and a half, and that's the fear. And we see George Lucas, Steven Spielberg have gone back and bowdlerized their own work. And other directors have evinced the opinion that they would like to go back and change their work to reflect, I'm doing air quotes here, modern sensibilities. And this is a danger, because, you would think once you had created a piece of art that the art would stand on its own. Nobody wants to paint an ice cream cone in Mona Lisa's hand. Nobody wants to add wind turbines to Van Gogh's paintings. It's a dangerous trend, and it doesn't appear to be ending anytime soon. They keep on keeping on. Even after the pushback they got over Roald Dahl, they still plan on going ahead and changing what they feel are objectionable passages in James Bond. And as we see in Roald Dahl, what they find objectionable is like everything. Is there any adjective or adverb that isn't somehow a microaggression towards somebody somewhere? So if you have a work you love, and I've done this myself, I've made sure that I have books that I know will eventually come under attack, and it's a way of preserving them. As Ray Bradbury said, there's more than one way to burn a book. Alex Richmond, I've I'm always surprised at how wide your portfolio of comics is. Recently, I discovered you wrote many issues of the fantastic SpongeBob comics, which ran for a few years. I've heard that Stephen Hillenburg, the creator of SpongeBob, was at that time more heavily involved with the comics than he was with the TV show. Just how much input did he offer during your time on the book? And did you find his input useful? What kind of input did he usually offer, if any? Yeah, I do have a wide portfolio of stuff I've done because I've never been a comic book specialist. I've never specialized in one genre. I love the medium. So whatever genre you threw at me to turn into comics, that was the challenge. That was the fun for me, especially new material, new characters. Now, when Chris Duffy approached me, I worked with Chris Duffy at DC as an editor before Chris left to work for Nickelodeon. And Chris contacted me when Steven decided to do his own line of comics, which were initially distributed by Bongo, same people who were doing The Simpsons. And so Chris said, would you be interested in, he says, I need content. I'm doing a monthly book, 32 pages of story and art, no ads. He says, I'm going to need content, and I know you can provide it if you're interested. Would you want to do some SpongeBob? And I said, yeah, I got kids that are just the right age, so I've seen a lot of SpongeBob. And he says, well, let me send you the Nickelodeon SpongeBob magazines that we did. And I said, I already have them. He says, what? I said, I bought them. I bought them at the supermarket when I saw them because the comics are so much fun. What you're doing with SpongeBob in comic form is fun. And so I have them all, so you don't have to send them to me. And I'm very familiar with the material, and, we started working together. And, over the course of time, basically Chris would turn to me and say, I've got 3 pages, I got 2 pages, I got 1 page I need to fill. And then I would pitch him stories that would either be full issues or 10 pages or 12 pages or whatever. And it was I had a lot of fun working on these, a lot of fun. And Chris was so awesome to work with. Now, as far as Stephen Hillenburg's contribution, he was kind of in the background. I never dealt directly with him. I dealt with him through Chris, but he was very much involved, and he would make suggestions, but they were usually minor. I never had to rewrite stories or anything like that. But he would suggest things that he felt would make the story funnier. And of course, they did. His most common change was to change from actual comic art in a panel to perhaps a photograph of a fish, a photograph of, an undersea escarpment or whatever. And these suggestions went along with what he did on the show. He was always cutting away to photographs or animated photographs or live action. And so this was consistent with the SpongeBob thing. The toughest thing about writing SpongeBob was walking the fine line of absurdity. You're in a world where characters have campfires on the floor of the ocean. So it's like, how far can I push this without being too crazy? And apparently there was almost no limit. But the hard and fast rule is to never point out the absurdity. Never go meta. Never let the audience in on the fact that you knew this was crazy. So it's almost as if the stories were designed to make you think they were written by an idiot, which made them even funnier. So, but yeah, he was heavily involved with the comics, but I never had any direct contact. I would have enjoyed some direct contact with him, but my relationship with Chris was so solid, so rock solid, and the lines of communications were clear, and so there was never any need. John Bua. The world has gone wacky. All of a sudden, everyone wants to be represented in the entertainment they consume. I always saw myself in Ben Grimm, the lovable thing. I always felt alone in a crowd, a bit of a lug, and overall, a dependable friend. I felt a bond with that character even though his skin is rocky orange. I've also felt that Cyborg and I were similar. He, another rough exterior, soft interior, dependable friend. I managed to form this connection despite him being black and me being white. John goes on. And of course, Peter Parker was every nerdy kid who sucked at sports. How is it people nowadays don't see this, that they only see a connection to a character if they share the same skin pigmentation? I am broke, chubby, barely representable man who identifies with Batman, as Batman represents the boy dream of absolute justice and power. How is this all being missed by today's so-called fans? Well, the problem is it's not really being missed by the fans because the fans have gone missing. Comic book sales have collapsed, and it's not transitional; it's a trend. The publishers have delved into, diversity, inclusion, and equity to such a degree that they've chased away longtime fans and casual readers, and given new readers no cause to pick up the material because it's so altered from what they've seen in movies and TV and the rest. So I still believe firmly that, and I think it's an objective truth, that the superhero genre is a childhood wish fulfillment fantasy. And your question, or rather statement, or your manifesto states that as well, because you projected yourself on characters unlike yourself, but you saw qualities in them that you admired, or at the very least you related to. And so you found these characters interesting, and you could live vicariously through their adventures, being able to relate to them. And, that's kind of the goal. By inserting identity politics into this and basically telling readers you can only like characters who look like you, you break that social contract with the readers that I'm going to bring you characters who are universally appealing, who have codes of honor and ethics and personalities that you can recognize in yourself and relate to. Instead of doing that, the publishers now lecture you. I'm going to present you with a character that you probably won't like, and if you don't like them, you're racist or sexist or homophobic. If you don't like these characters that we've barely spent any time creating or building, then there's something wrong with you. I've run into this recently where a writer told me that a project that we were working on together, told me that he wanted to have a diverse cast, that diversity was very important to him. And he presented me with a list of characters that he had created, and every single one of them was a stereotype based on the race he had chosen for them. And I hated to point this out to him. And I said, if you really want true diversity, change all of these characters to some other race or ethnicity or gender, and then they're interesting. The character, I'm just using as an example, the Armenian character who you gave all of these interesting character tropes to would actually be even more interesting if he was African American with those same tropes, which aren't related to his race. So that's the insidious thing, that this call for diversity, in my opinion, is a detriment. It is like anti-diversity, because you're dealing in stereotypes or pandering. Now, the other problem, of course, is the perceived audience for these comics is some sort of imagined hipster comic book sophisticate, an audience that does not exist. They are making comics for people who don't read comics. They're trying to appeal to an audience that will never, ever look at a comic book. And the small minority of these people who do it ironically. And from your own personal experience, any of you will know that anything that you do ironically, you don't do for a long time. It doesn't become a habit. If you're ironically wearing your hat sideways. Yeah, you're going to do that for about a week. I hope I answered your question there. I went off on a bit of a rant, but this stuff bugs me. It really does, because this whole diversity, inclusion, equity thing is having the exact opposite effect that its purveyors seem to espouse. Although I think maybe it is having the effect they want. It's dividing us and making us more aware of our differences rather than our similarities. And trust me, in the human race, our similarities far outnumber our differences, and our differences simply aren't important, or as important as are being presented to us in these wonderful days of the 21st century. Paul Petrick, would you be willing to be the everyday writer of the Dick Tracy comic strip? Yeah, I like Dick Tracy. I've read a lot of Dick Tracy. I read it as a kid growing up. I've read a lot of collections recently, and I like it. He's a badass crime fighter, takes no prisoners. It's an absolute, depiction of good versus evil. There's no gray areas with Dick Tracy. You're either a good guy or a bad guy, and bang, 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 you're not around anymore. And Chester Gould was terrific at traps, which is something I admire. A good trap and a good escape from a trap, hard to write. He's also great at coming up with colorful ways of getting rid of his villains. My favorite is, I believe it was Flat Top, who was crushed between two ocean liners. That's a great exit for a bad guy. I often wonder if Ian Fleming was a Dick Tracy fan because of the creative ways in which he killed off his villains. But once again, you get me in trouble with Max Allan Collins. I think Max Allan is current writer on the Dick Tracy comic strip. Is this a conspiracy to have me replace him? I have no interest. The guy's doing a good job. He's invested in it. Leave him alone. Stop trying to replace Max Allan Collins with me. Obviously the Venn diagram of our interests coincide here and there, but that's no reason for me to take a guy's job away or try or even think about it. No writer likes to think there's another writer nipping at his heels or thinking, "Ooh, I'd like to write his stuff." I'd like the other half of that sandwich. Yeah, I'll stay on my corner and he'll stay on his. MB. Do you believe a woke character can be used in such a way as to not pander to any particular ideology? Basically, can a woke character be used in a way that would appeal to a broader audience? Well, I would argue that not necessarily woke, but we certainly have liberal characters, classic American liberal characters. Daredevil absolutely is one. He's an idealist. He gets broken down, but rises up again, and nobody can take away his principles, his dedication to justice and fairness and equality and fraternity and all the rest of those wonderful things. He is a classic liberal and well presented. He's a character I don't particularly care for for a lot of those reasons. I mean, I don't care to write. Would not care to write because I probably wouldn't do him justice. Just as when a liberal writes The Punisher, they don't do him justice because they don't get it, right? They don't get what drives them. Another, famously liberal character is Oliver Queen, as represented or rebooted or reimagined by Denny O'Neil, and it continues to this day that Oliver Queen is a bleeding heart liberal, probably lifelong Democrat, supporter of unions and things like that. Always, looking for justice for the downtrodden and blah, 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 blah. All these great liberal principles. And I have written Oliver Queen. And I believe I've written him fairly. And, but woke? No, not woke, but liberal. And certainly presented in a way, people love Oliver Queen, and why wouldn't they? Even more to the point, Hawk and the Dove. Here we have representation originally by Steve Ditko, and boy, who was the original writer on that? Steve Skeets? Was it Denny O'Neil? I can't remember. In any case, yeah, I know all you comic geeks are out there. How can you call yourself a comic geek? You can't remember. Okay, I just can't remember. I'm sorry. So Hawk and the Dove, if you don't know, they were brothers, and Hawk, is during the Vietnam War. He represented, basically the conservative values, all-American patriotism, blah, blah, blah. And Dove was, the peacenik, liberal character. And, in a, very direct comic booky way, they addressed the issues of the day. But it was interesting, their differences and everything else. I think that Dove, even as a conservative, I think Dove was shown to be way more of a wimp than he should have been portrayed. But this was Ditko, who has absolutely no time for weakness. All of that said, can you make a woke character interesting? No, because it'd be like writing a comic about a member of a cult. Because people that are woke, the classic depiction or classic reality of a woke person is that they've bought into an ideology and they will not hear anything that defies that ideology. They will not listen to anything that they disagree with because they've already made up their mind about everything. They've already, and they really haven't made up their mind. They've been told what they should think. And they either think that because they believe it, think that because they're afraid not to believe it, or think that because they didn't believe it but have been accustomed to running with the pack, running with the crowd, wanting to be with the cool kids, and so come to believe it organically, or through osmosis over time, through habit. I will not use a Nazi analogy here. Anyway, so a woke character by very definition is uninteresting, and we see the woke output from the big two publishers, and that is the proof of the pudding. None of these characters stick. None of these characters are relatable. Nobody cares about these characters because there's no reason to care about them, because there will be no evolution. There will be no arc for this character. I mean, think about your favorite characters: Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Wonder Woman, Storm, whatever. They have disappointments. They have setbacks in their life. They learn from mistakes. Woke people don't make mistakes. It's all their pathway to whatever nirvana they're heading for is assured. All they have to do is say the right words and not say the wrong words, and they're fine. And who would want to read about people like that? I don't even want to know about people like that. Jonathan Lauer. I've been thinking about Diamond Comics distribution and their seeming monopoly in the comics industry. DC and Marvel recently-ish cut ties with them, and I've been thinking about what could have led to this. It seems IDW, Image, and Dark Horse still employ them, but will they jump ship too? In your opinion, what does Diamond do wrong, or are they the only people that know how to do comics distribution correctly, hence their popularity, and if so, why? Or is it simply a service for an industry in decline that large companies can do themselves and independent comics creators don't want to rely on? Basically, I just want to know your thoughts regarding what's good and bad about them. Are they contributing to the downfall of mainstream comics medium? Yeah, they are. They've been a detriment. The whole direct market angle on selling comics has been in the long term a detriment to comics. And so with Diamond as the only comic shop, only distributor, they're sort of left holding the bag. And, they're the last man standing. And you're right, they are servicing a declining industry. And I think Diamond continues to survive by lowering its own expectations. Diamond will retreat from different things, most recently, doing a lot of tchotchkes and merchandising and things like that. They'll pull back and retreat so they can survive another day. But eventually, Diamond will go away because the comic shops are dying quite quickly. It's been a steady decline for the last couple of decades, and it seems like they're more sharply falling off the cliff recently. Now, people will point to, hey, but there's new comic shops opening all the time. Largely, these comic shops are back issue only. I mean, we have a couple in my neighborhood, and they do quite well. They don't sell any new comics. They buy out people's collections. They buy out the inventory of stores that are closing and sell the comics back issues at reasonable prices and get regular customers and encourage collecting and all the rest of it. And that's outside the Diamond system. That is, mom and pop, cash only, barter. These are guys trolling flea markets and garage sales just looking for inventory. I mean, it's basically comic book collecting, like when I was a kid, turned into a business. And it's pretty smart, it's pretty sharp, and it's pretty sad because it proves that people want the old stuff. They don't want the new stuff. They've rejected new comics and so turn back to their old favorites. And now new readers are discovering their old favorite comics. Maybe their dad, their uncle told them about, 80s comics and 90s comics, and they go to the local back issue shop and they're able to check them out at prices lower than eBay. So, I mean, that's a good thing for the comics medium, not necessarily a good thing for the publishing business end of it. And it comes down to Diamond. Diamond basically crushed the other distributors. I think everything was healthier when there were other distributors, when there was competition. Monopolies are not a good thing. The only real competition for Diamond are, DC and Marvel themselves, as well as the book distributors, who obviously distribute graphic novels as well as any other kind of print material. So, but really, Diamond doesn't have any real competition in this arena, and which is bad. And Diamond hasn't always been. No, they've never been interested in the future of the medium. They've been interested in the bottom line. I remember, I know I've told this story before, but back in the 80s, I went to a Diamond symposium, Diamond whatever. They would have these big seminar sales things at the warehouse for retailers. Hundreds of retailers would show up, and the different comic book companies would do presentations for them. At the time, I was working for Eclipse, and me and a couple of other Eclipse guys were standing in line, getting ready to go up and do our presentation. I was going to present Airboy, and one of the big muckety mucks at Diamond came along and told us all what to say. Say this, say this, say this, say this. And I said, hey, I got my presentation ready. And he goes, yeah, but you need to say this, this, and this. I said, look, I don't work for you. I work for Dean Mullaney. And this guy said, you all work for us. And this was when there were still other distributors. But Diamond thought, we're the big boy on the block, and you got to do what we say. That's never a good situation. The other problem with Diamond and direct sales is that they campaigned to DC and Marvel to get off the newsstand because they had convinced comic book retailers that the newsstand was their enemy, that the newsstand was competition. Why would someone come in a comic shop if they could just buy the comics at cover price at the newsstand? And idiotically, DC and Marvel gave into this and began to shrink their presence on the newsstand, began to pull back. Well, I can tell you from my own experience and my own royalty checks that the newsstand was where it was at, not the comic shops. At least for me, my majority of my sales were to casual readers at the newsstand. As comics moved from the newsstand to almost entirely direct sales, my income shrank significantly. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of other creators. And while it was a boom times for a while there in the 90s, when that ended, we were left with almost no newsstand presence. The comic book gold rush was over, and we all had to kind of find another way. We had to reduce our ambitions. we had to refinance the house. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, it's the glory days are over, but that was quick. And there was nothing to go back to, because scorched earth policy of DC and Marvel, they had virtually destroyed the newsstand presence. And that's the worst thing that could possibly happen, because newsstand wasn't competition with direct sales. Newsstand was entry level. Newsstand was that, first hit you got. And, the trend would be, as a kid, you would find comics at the newsstand, and a certain percentage, the vast majority of those kids who found comics in the newsstand would read them for a while, outgrow them, and move on to something else, like girls or cars. But that minority of kids who got hooked on comics and had to have comics all the time would end up at the comic shop. So this was your, entry level marketing was the newsstand. And then for the diehards, they would go to a comic shop, because I insist that no one ever walked into a comic book shop cold. No one was ever at the strip mall and said, hey, there's a comic book shop. I've never been in one of them before. I think I'll go in. No, that's not how it works. If you're listening to me, you're a comic nerd, you're a comic geek, and the feeling when you first saw that first comic book shop in your neighborhood. You ran in there. I mean, if you heard about it from someone else, you jumped on the bus or hitched a ride or hopped on your bike, and you got there as quick as you could, counting the seconds until you could walk into that comic book shop. You were driven to that comic book shop almost by hypnosis, by your love of the comics you found on the newsstand. There's no casual looky-loos in a comic book shop. Only the devoted go through that threshold. And that's what the direct market killed. It killed that pathway from casual readership to fandom. And we're all paying the price. Literally. $5.99 comics? Get out of here. Yvonne Magila, you have worked in a few year one graphic novels at DC Comics, and I agree with you. DC should make some year one promotional campaign and put all the year one books side by side. It's not easy to find them here in Brazil. Also, in a recent interview, you said that the new Rambo graphic novel is a kind of Rambo's year one too. So I realize you are kind of everybody's year one horror guy. Yeah, that's how I put it. So particularly, I'm just having fun, Yvonne. So particularly at DC Comics, how many year one comics did you create? How many other characters year ones have you created so far? Well, in addition to Robin year one and Batgirl year one and Nightwing year one, there was a year one annual stunt in '95. And I got to do basically Dick Grayson, his first year as a full-fledged Robin. It's kind of actually year two, because it takes place after Robin year one. And then I got to retell the origin of Green Arrow in more detail, and a lot of which was borrowed for the television series. And then for Detective Comics, I chose to do Riddler year one, basically the origin of the Riddler. And these were a lot of fun. And I always thought, and obviously the rest of the annuals that year dealt in year ones as well. So everybody was doing a year one thing of one character or another. And I don't know why these haven't been collected as well, because the year ones, as I've often said, serve as intros. They're 101s to these characters. I mean, a year one book should ideally tell you everything you need to know about the character, the setting, the supporting cast. It's the setup for the rest of the series. It's the extended origin story. And we all love a good origin story. Hollywood likes them so much they include them in almost every damn movie. I mean, how many different interpretations of the Waynes going down that damn alley are we going to have to sit through? So anyway, yeah, I mean, these are important, but DC resisted marketing Year One as a marketing tool. To me, you say they're hard to find in Brazil. They're no easier to find here in the USA, and I propose many times to DC that they market these things with trade dress that was similar. So that you would have like a library of Year Ones, that would have identical spines and some kind of theme to them that would let you know this is part of the Year One series of books. So I think they should continue. I mean, my proposal was, why not Green Lantern Year One? Why not The Flash Year One? Wonder Woman Year, everybody. Just give everybody Year One. Why wouldn't you? Just for the sake of having it. First of all, they sold well. Every Year One I ever did was enormously successful. Some of the most successful projects I ever did at DC were these Year One things. And why wouldn't you continue that? Why wouldn't you, I guess the comic publishers stopped being a business and started being something else, caretakers. But caretakers for who? Certainly not the characters, certainly not the franchises. So anyway, long story short or long story longer, it's a damn shame they don't do them anymore. Okay, what you reading? People ask me, hey, what comics? What current comics are you reading? The answer is almost always none. But I did read this Louis Trondheim version of Donald Duck. It's this big oversized hardcover. It's a companion to an earlier volume featuring Mickey Mouse, and it's Donald's Happiest Adventures. And Trondheim imagines a series of comics. It starts with the premise that he and the artist on the book, whose name fails me at the moment, sorry, they find at a garage sale, they find a trove of old Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse comics. And they're representing them here for you. And that's why it's the artist pixelated. Right? These are supposed to look like pages from a comic from the 60s, a lost comic that everybody has forgotten about. And it was so much fun to read. They even present pages that are stained, pages that are torn, and there are missing pages in the story. I love that there's missing pages because they couldn't complete their collection before presenting this to you. And there's a lot of like meta gags that break the fourth wall. It's a classic. This one is particularly a classic Donald Duck story, but at the same time, it's a parody on a Donald Duck story. And they point out the absurdities and ridiculousness of a lot of the situations. At the same time, it's in a loving way, a very loving way. But the story's intriguing. It's this particular volume has a philosophical bent as Uncle Scrooge sends Donald Duck out into the world, not to seek a lost city or a shipwreck or some Spanish galleon or some valley of gold. He sends him out to find the secret of happiness. And in the story, the whole concept of happiness is contemplated in a way that is sometimes funny, sometimes touching, and sometimes thought-provoking. This is a great tribute to Carl Barks in that it shows it recognizes the depth of the examination of human nature that Carl Barks sometimes indulged in. It acknowledges that there's an intellect behind the creation and depiction of these characters. They're not just there to be, silly and goofy and get in ridiculous situations. That there's not necessarily something to be learned, but something to be discovered about these characters. And there's a depth to them. And these two guys capture that perfectly. And I urge you to get it. I'd urge you to get the Mickey Mouse one, but it's really expensive now. came out from IDW. This particular volume, which is a perfectly matching volume to the IDW Mickey Mouse volume, is from Fantagraphics. So, hey, someone mentioned Rambo earlier. So from Duckburg to the steaming jungles of Indochina, First Kill, which is a Rambo graphic novel about John Rambo's first tour in Vietnam, is available now on Indiegogo. It is available in demand, so you can still get in on this. It is at the printers now. It will be in the hands of all of you who bought it next month. And if you've seen the color work, it's astounding. Terrific cast of artists: Matt Barr, Butch Geiss, Aaron Aflici, and others. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful looking book. And as I've insisted that you know, it is a straight up Vietnam War story. There's no moping around as we take John Rambo from being a high school student in Arizona to the conflict in Vietnam, and embroils him in a fight for a besieged fire base deep in the jungles of the Ia Drang Valley. So if you like war stories, if you like Rambo, I urge you to check it out. You will not be disappointed. And hey, if you got questions, comments, pictures of the dogs and kitties, whatever, suggestions for things you might want me to read or review, contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is the most reliable way of reaching me. I check it a few times a day. You can ask questions here below the video. You can ask questions on Twitter or Facebook, but the most reliable way to be sure that I read your question is, and sometimes replied in the email back to you, is to go right here to brunobookstore@gmail.com. I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thank you all for watching. Thanks for the thank yous and likes and whatever else you've done to help me support this little enterprise. And I will see all of you down the road.